Hello, everybody. I'm Ken Clark, editor of Hardware and Building Supply Dealer and HBSDealer.com. And we have a very special guest on our one-on-one interview series program today. If you read HBS Dealer, you know that there's a lot of deals out in the industry. And we have with us Larry Morgan, who's the principal of Mountain States Acquisitions and the author of a new book called Closer. He's made a lot of deals. Larry, can you please say hello to our audience?
Hello, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Firstly, can you briefly tell us, Larry, how you got into the business?
Well, you know, I got into it kind of by accident, Ken. I retired from sales, selling other things at a very early age. I think I was 51 or 2. And I moved to Jackson Hole, where I am right now. And I built my house, and I started buying lumber off of a lumber yard over across the valley in a little town called Victor, Idaho. And the owner of the lumber yard became a fishing buddy. And one day we were fishing, and he said, I want you to sell my lumber yard. And I said, hell, I don't know anything about selling lumber yards. And he said, well, you'll figure it out. Well, I did. And I think it's been a long time ago, but I think the buyer was Anderson Lumber out of Salt Lake. And it was just really a matter, Ken, of being in the right place at the right time. That was sort of the beginning of the big boom in lumber acquisitions. And I never looked back.
Can you tell the audience how many deals you've been involved in?
I think since that first lumberyard in Victor, I've done probably 100 transactions. Now that includes lumberyards, drywall distributors, roofing distributors, hardware stores, construction companies, but everything was always more or less related to the lumber industry. I like to say if it's touched a house, I've probably sold it.
Well, I want to talk about your book, The Closer. But first, is there a way to explain how the dynamics have changed since you started selling that first lumberyard and kind of the industry today, and what are some of the big differences?
Well, I think Ken, the big differences have been there've been so many acquisitions, and the biggest difference I see now is the entry into the marketplace of the big equity firms that are fueling the bus for the guys that are still out there buying lumber yards.
How does that change the game?
Well, for one thing, it brings a whole lot of money to the table.
Right.
So these equity firms have almost unlimited money, and they're spending somebody else's money. And I think it's driven up the multiples, and it's driven up the price of acquisitions.
Larry, I'm going to read a quick passage from The Closer. Tell me what you think. You're about to fly off into the world of high-powered sales. It's a place where big money and even bigger egos coincide with surprising truths and common misconceptions. It's a story about the few who reach the pinnacle of the sales profession. And then you're off and running with The Closer. How did you get the idea to write a book?
Well, it really wasn't my idea. For years, as I said, I first retired quite young, and I spent a lot of time traveling around the world, and I started a travel site called Be Free Too, TOO. And a publisher stumbled upon the website, and it contained poetry and short stories and travel pictures. And he asked me what I was doing now, and I told him I was still selling, and that I was selling in the lumber building materials industry, and he got pretty interested in that. And he suggested I write a book, and that if I wrote it and it was successful on Substack, he'd publish it. And so I started writing the book about, I don't know, 7 months ago, and I think I'm up to chapter 20. Kind of interesting. He gave me a lot of advice about online publishing. He said the average attention span out there is 15 minutes. So he said, don't write any chapter that takes more than 15 minutes to read. So that sounds like a lot of chapters, but they're all a real quick, easy read.
Well, the chapter, it's a very engaging style that you have, Larry. You're to be commended for your engaging style. Some of the chapter names, License to Steal, Hearing the Voice of God, The Python and the Pig.
Hopefully it's a very entertaining book. It started out simply as a how-to sales book, because I've been a salesman most of my life, and I've sold all sorts of things. And it's sort of morphed into an autobiography how-to sales book. And I'm just now reaching the point where I'm going to start getting into the LBM acquisition business.
Well, now you got our attention. What have been
Whole
what,
idea, Ken.
what have been some of the big LBM deals that you've been involved with? Can you share those? Do you have
You
to
know,
sign a non-disclosure agreement when you make a deal, or what can you
well,
tell
I
us
do.
about some of your more exciting deals?
I don't get into specific deals, but I leave the big deals up to Jason Frailer. And most of my deals, I've done deals with yards that had gross sales of 50 to 100 million. But my bread and butter are yards doing 10 to 20 to 30 million dollars. I remember when I first started, I think I did some of my first deals with Dale Kukowski, which was United Building Centers back then. And Dale couldn't resist a lumberyard doing $1 million a month. And I sold him a whole bunch of lumber yards doing $1 million a month. And, he turned out to be a genius because when the crash happened in 2008, those little lumber yards didn't suffer very much. But the builders that had gotten into business with the big lumber yards in the big markets, we all remember it was a train wreck.
Well, Jason, we hope you're watching. One of the big stories in the industry now is Brad Jacobs, the founder of QXO. He intends to invest a lot of money, billions of dollars, into the building product distribution business. Is that a big story?
Well, I think it's clearly the biggest story of 2024. I've communicated with Brad on LinkedIn, and he considers the lumber building materials industry is still fragmented. I don't know. I got an email from Craig Webb this morning of Web Analytics, and according to Craig, since 18 alone, there's been over 800 acquisitions involving 44,000 locations. Well, that's a lot of acquisitions, but it's hard to argue with Brad Jacobs' success. From transport to trucking to waste management to equipment rental. The guy's raised $4 billion. He's a billionaire and I'm not, so he must be a lot smarter than I am.
Well, I'm sure Brad Jacobs is watching this as well. So is the industry fragmented? How long can we continue to say it's a fragmented industry?
Well, I don't know. Those acquisitions involved, I think in 2021, there were at least 90 individual buyers. So I suppose those 90 buyers are still fragmented. I don't know if there's anybody out there big enough to buy USLBM or Kodiak. But if you include hardware and if you include the distributorships, there's still plenty of deals to be done. No, there's no question about it. And I don't see them slowing back. I think the buyers are a little nervous about the political situation in the United States, and I wouldn't say they pulled in their horns, but they've become a little more cautious than they were in what I'll call the good old days.
So, Larry, we are talking with Larry Morgan. He's the author of The Closer. Larry, do you have any final thoughts to our audience?
Well, I started the book because the industry's been so good to me over the last 31 years, and I've met so many fine people. I love the building materials industry, and I kind of looked at it as it's time for me to give something back. I've had so many great mentors in the industry that have helped me so much. Craig Bradshaw, Paul Hilbert, Mike Montalbano. Most of these guys have retired or they've pulled back, and I'm starting to think maybe at my age it's probably time I started to pull back too. But I'm still doing deals, so. Ironically, as I said earlier, my first deal was in the little town of Victor, Idaho. And in March, I closed another pretty good sized lumber yard over in Victor, Idaho. So after 31 years, I end up selling a lumber yard where I started selling 31 years ago. Maybe it's a sign that I should think about retiring.
It's a complete circle, the circle of life. Thank you very much, Larry Morgan, for joining us. Larry Morgan, the author of The Closer and the principal of Mountain States Acquisitions. Thanks very much, Larry.
One more plug to my book, if I can, Ken.
Sure.
If you want to read the book, I wrote it down. You go to thecloser.substack.com, and it's free. And every Friday, you'll get in your email a new chapter.
We're talking to Larry Morgan. Larry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ken. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I'm happy to talk to you anytime.
La 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 la